Peter Fury, and don't forget to subscribe to Porky's Corner, because I've been a helmet of the month and you need to listen to me. Yeah? So follow him, yeah? And get the fella some followers up, for Christ's sake. He wears his heart on his sleeve, the good man, Russ. So follow Porky's Corner, says it as it is, and you know, I appreciate the helmet of the month, Russ. No problem.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, mate.
Big John! Go on, Dad! Go on, Dad! Go on, son! Give it to him, Dad! Show it his boss! Come on! Come on, Johnny!
Hello all you hardcore boxing fans out there, how are you doing? It's Russ here from Porky's Corner, the voice of hardcore boxing. Today I'm joined by Julian McGowan from West Yorkshire. Before I start, I've had Julian on here 2 times before, very popular. The comments section is on fire when he comes on. But the main thing is, people are watching into the high 80s and early 90%. So that means what he's speaking is the truth. People believe it and they're engaged by what he's got to say. So we've got a surprise for you today. There's some things that we're going to speak about that are going to blow your mind all the way to the end of the video. So tuned in. Julian, how are you doing on this early Monday morning?
Yeah, I'm good, Russell. I'm good. Yeah, so we'll do a shift before I start work. But good weekend, apart from watching the news, which is pretty depressing, mate. But everything's good here. Staying positive. And thank you for the kind words, and thank you for everybody who's watching and commenting. Really humbled.
No problem, mate. No problem. Before we speak about a bit of weekend's action, I usually cover that weekend, so we'll just do a little bit of that. I don't want to spoil it. But you want to speak about your former British champion, Gary Sykes. How did you meet Gary?
I actually, I was a coach, amateur coach at Keith Tate's back in the day. You forget, it might have been the mid-90s after I'd finished boxing for Keith. And Sykes was one of a group of kids who came down from the gym. They all lived on the same estate as Mally McIver, who was a pro I used to work with. And Sykes was a little bit late, actually, as a boxer. You know, he was 15 years old. And what used to happen was Keith used to train with the juniors a little bit earlier, and I used to coach more of the seniors like Mally McIver, some other kids. And I just got chatting to Sykes, and he asked Keith, he used to like some of the stuff I used to do. He used to stay back and watch. He'd been at the gym 2 or 3 months, and he said to Keith Tate, he says, "Can I do a few sessions with seniors, Keith?" Keith says that was fine. So we did a few sessions, and then he had his first amateur fight in Redcar, and Keith couldn't make it. And he sent myself with Gary and another kid who was the same weight and the same age as Gary. And the idea was that Gary or this other kid, a kid called Chris, would box. So we went to this tough working men's club in Redcar, and Keith had said to me, I always remember these words, he says, "Have a look at this kid, and if he's any good, put Sykes in with him. If you think he doesn't look anything special, put Chris Dawson in with him." He says, "Okay, that's fine." So he had a look at the kid. He just looked like he could fight. And I put Sykes in with him, and I've never seen a debut like that in my life. And Sykes, this kid was a good kid for a no-bouter, you could tell. And him and Sykes had a real tear-up. And Gary stood him on his head and gave him a count in the 2nd and 3rd round. And I rung Keith Tate up on the way back, and I said to him, "Keith, you've got someone here. You've got someone here." And we just knew, you knew it was raw, but it was as hard as nails. He threw 1,000 punches, and we became friends. And I stayed in that gym for about another year, another 2 years. Took Sykes for his first 5, 6 amateur fights. And then as I went into the pros with Mally McIver, and we left the gym, you know, to do our own thing and to go pro, Gary and I always kept in contact. I got him a place at Batley Art College so he could do his national diploma, H&D, something to fall back on, because I knew the lecturer. That was where I'd spent my time studying. And we stayed in touch all the way through the ABAs. And he said, "If I ever go pro, Jules, will you train me?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. Once Mally's done, I'm done." And he kept asking me, and he kept asking me. And we did a few weeks together at Keith's, and I guess the rest is history.
What belts did he go on to win, Gary?
So Gary won, he was a two-time holder of the British title. And he was an outright winner of the British title. We can obviously cover that. That's one of the biggest miscarriages of justice, what's gone under the radar in British boxing over the years. Scandalous. He also won the English belt, and everybody knows he went into prize fighter. And we can talk about the reasons as to why. That might seem a crazy decision to do that. And he also was a finalist in prize fighter, beating Tommy Coyle, beating Anthony Crolla, and losing a split decision to Terry Flanagan in the final. Terry's a good friend of mine, and his trainer, Steve Mailer. It was largely avoided. You had champions, and I'm not saying it was avoided because boxers were scared to fight him, by the way. I'm not claiming that at all. But Kevin Mitchell vacated rather than fight Sykes. Then Ricky Burns stepped out of fighting Sykes for the British. Stephen Smith vacated rather than fight Sykes. So there was a theme that it was a long, hard night for anybody. It was a high-risk, low-reward fighter. With the fight with Adrian Broner, we were 2 weeks away from for the world title in Vegas. That was again more bad luck for Gary when the main event, Peterson and Khan, was cancelled because obviously Peterson failed the drugs test. But Sykes was probably the unluckiest fighter in boxing. If you know him like I know him, all the way from the amateurs, from being overlooked in the Commonwealth Games, when the board sent Stephen Smith, who was brilliant and won a gold, by the way, all the way from the second time around in the ABA's breaking his hand in the semi-final, to just a catalogue of cancelled fights and missed opportunities. And it just shows if you are a small-time fighter from a small town with no backing, with no real sponsorship, and you don't really sell, quantifiable tickets, and you don't have a big promoter, you'll struggle to make any impact in boxing.
Yeah. You had a few incidents with board, didn't you? Really, you guys, you and Gary, and back and forth and that. What happened there?
Yeah. Well, the crux of this, Russell, and this is why I really appreciate you giving me the time to get this off my chest. So the first question anybody who's watching this would be, if you have an issue with the Board of Control, you're a license holder, why don't you go through the process of appealing to the British Boxing Board of Control? That's the first question people's going to ask. And then the second question is, why choose Porky's Corner? Why choose your platform to air your views? Again, as a license holder. So first of all, in 2014, when I became aware of this big issue, this massive oversight by the Board of Control and Robert Smith, effectively, I appealed the Board of Control. I got to the stage I was ringing Robert Smith on almost a daily basis. His response, and we can cover that shortly, his response was, no, this is the situation, tough, to the point it basically wouldn't take my calls. He didn't want to discuss it. So as a small coach, work full time, just come from nowhere really, and a fighter without that support, you've got no chance. You go against the Board of Control, you have got zero chance of having any kind of appeal or any kind of justice. So I've been watching your show now for, it might be 12 to 18 months, and I've become engaged with it, as you know. No ass kissing, just saying it like it is. I think a lot of the time you're about the injustices of sport, namely the injustices of boxers, as opposed to injustices of trainers, managers, promoters. Yeah. The sport, that would be nothing without those fighters out there. And we've had a couple of conversations so far, and also why now? These are really tough times, as you know. Hopefully, I don't come across as too sentimental. It's not always everybody's cup of tea, but these are really tough times, and we're all seeing at the moment the government. We're all seeing the corruption with the government and how people in positions of power. There's one rule for them. They're almost like an autocratic state, and everything that's going on right now with the government is just reminding me of my experience with the Board of Control, who effectively just close you down because you're nobody. You bring nothing to the table, McGowan, Sykes, you've forgotten about, you're retired, you're done. And as a lowly license holder, a trainer stroke second, my 100 quid a year probably doesn't go very far compared to these big promoters and everybody else. So why now? Because I think it's time. I've gone through a period of reflection myself. I spoke to Gary Sykes often about this. we can get down to the detail and the crux of the matter, but now's the time to speak out, and now's the time to say to the Board of Control and to any license holders who's listening, when I give you some evidence and I tell you exactly what the situation is with Sykes and why I was badly treated. All you boxers out there, this could be you, this might happen to you. All you trainers and managers, this might happen to your fighters. And this is supposed to be a level playing field, and everybody as license holders is supposed to have a fair shout and a fair shake. And that's not been the case with Sykes.
Why is that?
So basically, you know the rules, Russell. So the most coveted belt in boxing used to be called the challenge belt, is the Lord Lonsdale belt. You know, all British champions, they win temporarily the belt. Now the rules of the Boxing Board of Control is to own a belt outright, which is probably the most prestigious belt in boxing. You know, the heritage, it's 110 years old. To win a belt outright, for anybody who doesn't know, you have to have 4 successful British title fights, and one of those has to be a mandatory defence. Now, that's the key point here with Gary Sykes, where there was a huge injustice. When Gary Sykes beat Carl Johansson in March 2011, that was a mandatory defence. Yeah. So Gary won his belt of Andy Morris, defended against Kevin O'Hara. He got beat in prize fighter, and then he defended against Carl Johansson. Now, Carl Johansson was not somebody we would have chose to fight. Gary had lost to Buckland in prize fighter. Everybody knows, we've all seen the 45-second clip.
But belt wasn't on line, was it, in prize fighter, was it?
The belt wasn't on the line, and what had happened was Sykes beat Kevin O'Hara in May 2010, and there was no dates coming up. Frank Maloney had lost a lot of dates to Matchroom. Frank Maloney at the time was Gary's promoter. That was our initial contract. He was our first and only ever promoter, and there was no dates coming up. So we would call the board, or Chris Aston or Steve Wood would call the board, and you want the board to mandate somebody. That's ultimately what you need. When you're not a big name fighter, you want the board to mandate somebody to keep it going. Now, winning the belt was always Gary's ambition, to win it outright, and nothing came up. So Sykes had given up his job full time. He used to work with me to concentrate on boxing. And all of a sudden there was tumbleweed, there was a drought, there was no fights coming up, there was no mandatory defence. Sykes had a young child at home. He was struggling for money. You know, Chris Aston was pushing Frank Maloney for fights. Initially we talked about Gary fighting John Case. Sky weren't interested in that fight. And the earliest date that Frank Maloney and Sky had was actually January 2011 for Sykes. And that was the date that Sky had, but again, they weren't interested in the Johnny Case fight. So Sykes was looking at 7, 8, 9 months worth of inactivity. In other words, he was earning fuck all. He'd got no money coming in, and he'd got a young family. So we got offered prize fighter. The rest is history. Gary got beaten prize fighter. I will say, because I believe in being fair, that Steve Wood, who was Gary's co-manager, didn't support the prize fighter initiative. Steve's a really good guy, so I've got no issue with Steve Wood. He's done a fabulous job with his fighters, and he was probably the fairest guy I know in boxing. So I just wanted to just put out there about Steve Wood. He didn't support that, but we felt, and Gary felt, he had to earn. So unless there was a mandatory defence, he had to earn. So Sykes got beaten in prize fighter, and then Gary, we actually got a date. We was, again, as Sky had said, there was going to be some dates available in the beginning of 2011, and we got the Paul Truscott fight. Paul Truscott stepped forward, and Gary Sykes was going to fight Paul Truscott. Now, this is where it gets to that point. Carl Johansson and his team, we know them well, good guys. Carl Johansson objected to Sykes fighting Truscott. He says, "I'm the mandatory challenger for the British super featherweight title." Carl had been asked to do a final eliminator against Anthony Croller. Croller stepped out and he moved up to lightweight, and that left Carl Johansson as the mandatory challenger for Gary Sykes' belt. Johansson went to the board. This is online. I've sent you references. I've sent you links, screenshots. It's all documented. Johansson went to the board. He objected to the Truscott fight. the Board of Control withheld Carl Johansson's complaint, and we were told we had to fight Carl Johansson on the March date we were originally supposed to fight Truscott. Gary Sykes beat Carl Johansson. It was a fantastic fight, brilliant fight. He got off the floor to do so, and he obviously defended his belt in a mandatory defense. Anybody out there who think this is just me talking, go on to Wikipedia, go on to Google Gary Sykes' career, jump on Wikipedia. It's listed as a mandatory defense. Yeah. So we just thought, that's done. Okay, that's fine. Gary eventually lost his title to Gary Buckland. He had to wait 32 months to get another shot. He went out, he cleaned up the division, he beat absolutely everybody. And then when Gary Sykes beat John Case in 2004, May 2014, he beat John Case, and then we said, that's it, the belt's done. Sykes has won the belt outright. We were proud of that. Gary was over the moon. That was the ambition. That was the box ticked to win outright the most established, the most prestigious belt in world boxing. So what happened then? Sykes was then asked to defend against Liam Walsh. And Gary was at the end of his career then. He'd had lots of injuries. He'd had half of his finger amputated after the Case fight. He got a bad infection. And you just know when your fighter's on the slide. And I didn't want to do the Walsh fight. And I said to Gary, let's call it a day now, Sykes. Come on, let's leave it. And Gary says, Jules, can we do the Walsh fight? I says, Gary, come on. It's probably not a good fight I feel good about. You've won the belt outright. We've had a civic reception at the town hall with the mayor. Let's ride off into the sunset, do some personal training, do whatever. And he says, Jules, he says, my girlfriend's pregnant. I need the money. And he was being offered 22 grand for the Liam Walsh fight. And I felt compromised. And he says, come on, we've been together all my career. Let's do one more for the road. So we thought about this. And then I got a call from Steve Wood. And this was where Gary's world, or my world, just fell from under us. Steve Wood rung and he says, Jules, this was in training for the Walsh fight. The camp was horrendous. And Steve said, there's an issue with the Board of Control. They're not recognising the Carl Johansson fight as a mandatory defence. So obviously I sat on this for a while and I kept this from Gary. And says, Steve, that's nonsense. Carl Johansson, first of all, was a default mandatory challenger because Crawler had stepped out. Yeah. There was no one else for him to fight. Nobody in the super featherweight division wanted to fight Johansson. Johansson had been a brilliant champion. He's probably one of the biggest punchers in Europe at super featherweight. Why would we have, after getting knocked out by a Buckland, gone into a Johansson fight unless someone put a gun to our head? Steve, this is nonsense. And Steve says, I know it's nonsense, Jules, but I'm just telling you what Robert Smith has said. He says it wasn't a mandatory defence. So naturally, I rang Robert Smith, spoke to him, outlined why Johansson was a mandatory defence, and Robert Smith's response was, there is no paperwork to substantiate that Carl Johansson was a mandatory challenger. And I said, first of all, that's nonsense. But second of all, that's your problem. That's not my problem. If you don't do paperwork after your mandates, so if you don't do documentation, that is not my problem. Gary Sykes has done everything you've asked him to do. He had a mandatory against Johansson, which you're now denying. He had a mandatory against Buckland, and he had a mandatory against Liam Walsh. Sykes doesn't avoid mandatories. He's doing everything you've asked him to do. It's absolutely scandalous. With a bit of a back and forth, I think your memory fades, but I think I rung him 3-4 times on what felt like a daily basis. Maybe it wasn't. It felt like a daily basis. And you know when someone just stops answering the calls, yeah, and he wouldn't change his position. Robert Smith said, there's no documentation to say that Johansson was a mandatory challenger. So there's 2 points to this. There's the first point that, was there ever any documentation after Johansson was mandated? You would hope so. But if not, that's not our issue. That's your issue to document anything that's agreed at your board meetings or whatever. That's the first point. And the second thing, which is probably more unlikely, is if you're saying that Johansson wasn't a mandatory challenger, which nobody agrees with you, none of the websites agree with you. I've sent you references 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've sent you all this documentation, what states it was a mandatory challenger. Then shame on you for not listing him as a mandatory challenger. You should retrospectively, state that it was. But I know that second scenario never happened. It was a mandatory challenger. Anybody who doesn't believe Carl Johansson was the mandatory challenger or deserving of that is being unreal. So by default, nobody wanted to fight him. We took the fight. Sykes took the fight. And it was just disgusting. So you imagine, put yourself in my situation. I have a fighter who thinks he's won the belt outright. He's clearly past his best. We're going into a fight that we don't really want to do. But so boxers take fights for all kinds of reasons. And I'd agreed with Gary, by the way, that this was my last one. Gary, we no more after this one. You can do what you want, but I'm done. And this is where it turns this is where it leaves a real sour taste in my throat. So one of the board representatives during the Walsh camp called me and he says, "We're coming to collect the belt." So what do you fucking mean you're coming to collect the belt? "We're coming to collect the belt so we can take it to the venue." So it's Gary's belt. "Are you taking the belt because you have a new one made?" And I explained the situation. This board representative says, "Listen, we're being told he hasn't won the belt outright yet. That's what we're being told." He says, "I agree with you," because this was a central area guy. "I agree with you. A couple of other guys have mentioned this at the central area. And our understanding was that Johansson was a mandatory." So this is the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing. Those guys said, "We believe you and we think Sykes has won the belt outright, but we've been instructed by head office, by Robert Smith, to return that belt." So they agreed to pick up the belt from my gym, which was, we'd moved around the corner from the Central Boxing Club, from myself and another lad had set the gym up. They came and picked the belt up. Gary thinking, what's going on here? I said to Gary, "They're picking the belt up, Gary, because that's just a temporary thing. Yours is being made right now. You've won the belt outright. Don't worry about that. It's just a procedure that they have to do. They're going to take it to the venue and you'll have one made. You don't have a second-hand belt. You have a brand new belt made." So Gary didn't fully buy that. We had to keep focused and there was a lot of weight to lose in camp. So now you picture this scene, and this is absolutely true. And Robert Smith, if it's not true, then let's discuss it. If I'm wrong, if this is not true, what I'm going to say, then there are witnesses to this. Gary Sykes being one of them, another coach, another two coaches, being two of them, and myself. So you picture the scene, everybody who's listening now, and I know I'm going on and on. Gary Sykes is gloved up. He's not in the best shape of his career. He's fighting Liam Walsh, who was a world-class, phenomenal fighter. We hadn't had the best camp. We'd just about made the weight. Sykes is gloved up, he's warmed up, but he's a tough kid. He's a tough kid. Robert Smith's in the changing rooms. Gary being Gary, this must have obviously been built up in his mind for the past few weeks. Robert Smith must have said, "Good luck to him," whatever. And Gary being Gary says, "But the belt's mine, Robert, isn't it? The belt's mine." Now, I appreciate it caught Robert Smith in an awkward moment. This was 5-10 minutes before we went out to the XL Arena. Fury Chisora 2 undercard, huge crowd. Robert Smith turned around and said, "No, not yet. If you win tonight, the belt's yours. But up until this point, it's not yours." This is 5-10 minutes before Sykes went out to fight Liam Walsh. His head completely went. I kind of made small of it. I've got Sykes away from Robert Smith. I couldn't believe he'd said that. I could not believe he'd said that to a fighter, as a former fighter himself. 5-10 minutes before we did the ring walk, Sykes went to bits. First of all, to Liam Walsh and Liam Walsh's team. I've known those guys a while. Good guys. At that point, at that stage, I don't think Sykes would have beat Liam Walsh. We're not complaining. We're not making excuses, by the way. We don't do excuses. But Sykes' head went. He says, "Jules, what does he mean? He's gloved up, he's sweating, he's warmed up." He says, "What does he mean?" I says, "Oh, Gary, forget about it. It's an oversight. We'll sort it out. I'll promise you, Gary, I'll sort it out. We'll get the belt's yours. I can prove it. Don't worry about it." His head went. He got well beat on points. He got dropped in the first minute. He got no concentration, no nothing. And it was probably the worst career performance. And from then on, I think I'd had one more conversation with the Border Control contesting this. And then Gary and I got to a situation it was just too much for myself and Gary. I told Gary I was finished with boxing. I walked away. He carried on his career for a little bit longer. And it's a cloud that's been over our heads and his head. Gary, as you know, anyone who's listening, everybody knows, he puts this on social media. Gary has had a lot of problems outside of the ring. I'm not saying this is the sole reason for his problems, but Gary Sykes being robbed of the belt outright, his lifetime ambition by the British Boxing Board of Control's either a lack of documentation or a lack of giving a shit, is one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in boxing that has gone under the radar.
I think Robert Smith, right, hitches his tent up with certain promoters. I'm not going to mention their names, but we all know we're on about. And he'll go out to bat for them people. But the little people, they don't seem to matter to these people, do they?
It just doesn't matter. This is a kid. If you look at Sykes's career, he's a domestic operator. Now, he's been in what Sky Sports have called small hall classics. When he beat Dwayne Hill, they had an absolute barnstormer. When he beat Anthony Croller, Sky called it the undercard fight of the year. When Gary beat Andy Morris for the British title, it was a record number of punch stats. It was just short of 2,300 punches between both of them. The British Boxing Board of Control shortlisted Sykes and Morris as one of the 4 fights of the year. It went to the awards ceremony down in London. Why am I saying this? He's been a fantastic ambassador of British boxing. He has been a brilliant ambassador of British boxing, and he's been involved in some of the most thrilling fights. Even Prize Fighter, which we didn't want to go that way, but when it went on the wrong end of Prize Fighter, he still stepped up, he still brought entertainment. He boxed Prize Fighter at just above lightweight. He beat Anthony Croller, who was 4-1 on. Sykes has continually stepped up and has continually served British boxing well. And Robert Smith and all you senior guys over there in Cardiff, you had a fighter there who was proud to call himself a British champion. Unlike all these high-level fighters who are bypassing British titles, who don't give a shit about one of the most prestigious belts in boxing, Sykes wanted that belt, and he did everything you asked him to do. Everything you asked him to do, he did. Everything. What else could he do? And to turn around and to not award him that belt is shameful. This is something what sat with him for years and years and years. And you've left a real cloud over boxing for me, for Gary, and for anybody close. Now, Gary Sykes is from a town called Dewsbury. Dewsbury, unfortunately, is not known for very good things. It's generally known for bad things. But one of the shining things in Dewsbury was Gary Sykes. He had 2 civic receptions, never been done before. He went to 10 Downing Street. He met the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who was really just a fine person, you know, a working class person, but he didn't sell huge tickets. I'm not going to go into the price, into the purses that he got for his British title fights, but you wouldn't believe me if I told you. So he didn't earn great money. He didn't do great tickets. It was a short relationship with Kelly Maloney. That obviously ended. He was never picked up again by a promoter. No one cared about him. The Border Control didn't care about him. And unfortunately, it was a close team. You know, he didn't get big sponsorships, and he was shit on. So the people who should do the right thing are the Boxing Board of Control. And I'm asking you via Porky's Corner, via Russell's channel, I'm asking you and I'm appealing to you, seriously. I'm not here to throw stones, right? It's a miscarriage of justice. You've let a kid down. You've let one of your more exciting champions down. One of the few people who want to have that belt, one of the few people who was absolutely, that was his one ambition in life, was to get the belt outright. You've let him down. You've now got an opportunity to retrospectively review the Carl Johansson situation. I've got documentation, what I've sent over to Russell, documentation that saves online, various other things. I've created a timeline of events, a clear, concise timeline of events that led up to the Johansson fight. And
emails, documentation, the lot, Robert
I've
Smith.
got
So do the
everything.
right thing.
Yeah, so do the right thing. Give him his belt outright. And why didn't Sykes get his belt outright? It's a difficult one to speculate. Okay, what we know is it costs a lot of money.
10 grand, aren't they?
Yeah, they're in the region of 10 grand.
Hasn't he got a belt at all, Julian?
He has a replica that someone he knows, a friend of his, spent a couple of £100, and they've given him a replica. It's not the real thing. What you need is you need the recognition by the Boxing Board of Control, by Robert Smith and all those guys. Said, you know what? Johansson was a mandatory challenger. It's also an injustice to Carl Johansson, a guy who had earned his right to be the mandatory challenger for Sykes' belt. You've also been disrespectful to Carl Johansson and his team. Do the right thing. And I know that a lot of boxers and license holders watch this channel. And what you should do is you should support Gary Sykes. There should be, seriously, this is not no kind of joke. There should be justice for Gary Sykes. All you high-profile boxers who are watching this channel, and we know some of you are, you need to speak out about this because it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. You need to either recognize that Johansson was a mandatory challenger or retrospectively instill him as a mandatory challenger for Sykes' title. You need to get that belt made, and you need to get that belt presented to Gary Sykes, because this is an opportunity now to do the right thing. It's an opportunity to do something what's fair and to get justice for a really good, honest kid.
Yeah, so Robert Smith, do the right thing, and I might leave you alone for 12 months. If not, I'll put your name up in lights, and you know what I'm on about. So do the right thing.
Also, Russell, not that anybody cares, but I'm a license holder. My first aid is due, and I pay £100 a year for my trainer second license. If you do not install, not that you would care about me, if you don't instill or give Gary Sykes his belt, you'll get no more money out of me. That's another honest trainer you'll have lost. You get nothing out of me, and you can put that in writing.
Yeah, but you don't have to throw your chance away to be working in boxing over there still.
Would you want to work in this sport though, knowing how it's run, Russell?
Good question.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to have a point of principle, don't you? I think you have to.
Well, there's not many principles. Listen, people I've met in the sport of boxing, they're not worth a cup of cold piss, 95% of them. They preach pride and morals and this and that, and my word is made of wood and oak. But when it comes down to it, they say they don't want to work with one person, then an opportunity arises time down the line, and they straight up that person because it's money and a bit of ego and all that and blah, blah, blah. And I can understand that. But I want to see more people stick to the word in this sport of boxing, and so that it's like football. You know, well, we've got like pundits like Graham Souness, Mickey Richards, Roy Keane, sticking it to their old teammates or their old clubs, and they're not bothered about what anybody says because they're telling it straight. In boxing, you've got Darren Barker and Tony Bellew going into bat for Conor Benn, saying he's third best welterweight in the world after Spence and Crawford and things like that, and commentating on the former trainers fighter Barker, the pundit, and he'll commentate or something on Tony Sims' fighter Ben. Well, what's all that about? Tell the truth. Tell the truth, but they're not, are they? Because everybody wants to get a few quid, and in boxing, I notice things happen and then it goes away. It's like, I don't like to mention this up. I mention this, and we're not going to mention his name on here because there's a little crybaby, but a certain promoter, ex-promoter, but manager trainer from this area, a little guy, he's about that big. You know what I did when I interviewed some guys on my channel, they said what they said. Never accused him of anything. Never accused him of a thing. But he never come out for 10 and a half, 11 weeks and said boo. But yeah, every Monday and Sunday, we've got the sermons. We've got his sermons about what's going on in boxing. Silenced him. He didn't have plenty to say after that, did he? And that ain't going to go away. Oh, no. Because I'm the type of person that won't let that go away.
Just to let you know, Dave Caldwell, that these allegations are not going to go away. This is just the beginning. So I think you need to come out and do an interview. I mean, any other time we can't get you off IFL, Behind the Gloves, Seconds Out, Boxing Social, Fight Hype. We can't get you off YouTube. So you need to come out and answer these allegations. You're more than welcome to come on Porky's Corner. You can do it by Zoom. You don't have to do it in your gym. You can do it by Zoom. And I'll ask you these questions from these lads. All right? And then once you've answered them, then I'm going to play a card that I've got up my sleeve and put this to bed. All right? So come out, wherever you are.
Oops. There you go, Mr. Cordwell. Stop rubbing things out.
But people just hope it's going to go away. Like politicians, Boris Johnson wants these parties to go away, but it ain't going to go away, is there? This Gary Sykes thing, now you said this to me, it won't go away. Won't go away because I'll make enough noise about it. And I know enough people to keep it going, keep the noise going. And I hope people get behind it because it's a travesty. And Gary's not in a good way at the moment, is he?
No.
But nobody cares, do they? It's like I don't see anybody caring for other fighters. I'm not going to mention names because it sounds like that they're being hard luck stories, but there's fighters that are discarded like rubbish, used and abused. Well, a lot of them bring it on themselves because when they're riding high, they don't give a shit about anybody. But once it comes tumbling down, the shit hits the fan. Nobody cares about them, do they? Sometimes they bring it on themselves, sometimes they don't. But Gary Sykes, for me, always seems like a nice kid. He got on with it. He fought away in front of him. Never made any noise. You never had big teams behind you, did you? You just got on with it. But to me, it's bullying. Would this happen? Would it happen to Conor Benn? If this were his British title, there'd be hell on, wouldn't there?
Well, they'd do what they did with Kell Brook. Kell Brook was given his belt outright. I understand that, by the way. This is not a dig at Kell Brook. Kell Brook didn't have 4 successful, a bit like Charlie Magra, he didn't have 4 successful British title fights. And because they considered that he didn't have any significant competition at domestic level, Kell Brook was given his belt outright. So if you just think now, what you've just said is absolutely right. If Gary Sykes was backed by a big promoter, let's just say Queensbury or Matchroom, and the board wouldn't recognise, the Johansson fight as a mandatory and effectively wouldn't give him his belt outright. You imagine a phone call from Frank Warren or Eddie Hearn ringing the board of control saying, what's this nonsense? Why is Sykes not being given his belt outright? Oh, bit of paperwork, we'll sort it, don't worry about it. It would get done. It's easy because we'll just go away because who are we? What we're going to do? Are we going to take on the board? Are we going to, we can't take on the board through the board. Are we going to go get legal advice and we haven't got the cash? Sykes hasn't got 2 pence to rub together. So what are we going to do? What can you do? So it's like you've just said about Boris Johnson. We're the little people. Well, the little people have had enough. Those small people have had enough because if it wasn't for those little people, there'd be none of you guys in your positions of power. And it's interesting because when you look at the history of the belt, it used to be 3 wins and you got the belt outright. In 1999, that rule changed. And the then secretary or the head of the Boxing Board of Control, Andy Morris, actually quoted, he said,
John Morris.
John Morris. So John Morris actually quoted, he said, one of the reasons for changing the rules from 3 successful fights to 4 successful, including a mandatory, is the cost of the belts. Basically, he cited it. It says the cost of the belts. So I can't help but feel it's the cost of having a belt made, which is one of the reasons why Sykes was just basically just cast aside. Honestly, you'd feel, wouldn't you? Gary Sykes' 8-9 year career, he would just feel it's all been for nothing because the one thing I wanted to get out of boxing, not the money, not the fame. I wanted a belt outright. And he just said, well, what has it all been for? What's all the sacrifice for Gary? The sacrifice for me, for my family. We work full time. The sacrifice for other people who work with Gary. What has it all been for? Honestly, It's scandalous, but the Board of Control, because they're watching your channel now, irrespective of what they think of you and you think of them, Russell, the Board of Control, they've got an opportunity now to put this right. Do something good. Listen, Christmas is coming up in a week or so's time. Do something good. Make somebody's day, not just because it's a charitable thing to do. Make somebody's day because it's the right thing to do, because it's a just thing to do, because he was a proud champion and he was an outright winner of the belt. And I'll continue to repeat that. Honestly, I'll continue to say that because you know it's true and you know what you did and you've got a chance to put it right.
Yeah, so Robert Smith, put it right and goodwill to all men and all that. Put a smile on Gary Sykes' face this Christmas. Just put it right, because if it were Warren or Ern on your case, you'd put it right because you want to keep them sweet, wouldn't you? Hey, you shit house.
I didn't say that, Robert.
Julian, you might have problems when you're trying to renew your license and all that. Are you bothered?
Well, it's really simple for me. Anybody who knows me, not everybody in boxing loves me, but I think people at least say I have integrity and I'm honest. I've worked in a senior role for quite a long time now for a large publisher, so I do all right in life, and I do that because I'm honest. That's not me sounding like a complete, idiot. I'm honest, and I like to think I've got integrity. So if anything I've said, that's just not my opinion. That is what I truly believe, and other people truly believe to be true. So if anything what I've said is slanderous or untrue, either call me up in your little kangaroo court at the central area, or sue me, because you can, because you know what I've said is true, and you know what I've said is right. And guess what? I sleep on a night.
Yeah, well, these people, you see, what they do, they pay lip service to us. It's like people keep emailing me, and I haven't got a problem with people emailing me saying, oh, Steve Gray's been called before board. Well, look, that's just to pay lip service to fans. It'll all be forgot about in a couple of days. And you know what Steve Gray's been called for, don't you? The recent misdemeanors from these people. These people don't feel like they have to explain anything to us. So how is it the boxing board of control? It's of no control, isn't it? Because they're controlling the money aspects and everything that's in it for them. Well, they're not controlling it as a whole. Board license holders know, because they tell me every day, just to see my inbox. But don't tell me, tell them. Put it on your social medias. Not going to do that, are they?
I'll tell you a short story, Russell, absolutely true story. When Gary got knocked out in prize fighter, as soon as he got hit by Buckland, I could see he was gone. And as the referee got to 1 or 2, you could see me on Sky jump on the corner of the ring, and I started to get in the ring. I got a letter from the Board of Control saying I'd illegally entered the ring, and I had to explain my actions during prize fighter. Well, my actions on the fighter had just been fucking sparked, and I wanted to get in there to make sure it was okay. I didn't attend the meeting. I just called them up and just says, I'm not coming. Absolute nonsense. It's a bunch of guys sat drinking coffee or just thinking of reasons to get license holders to turn up, because it fills the time. It gives them something to
don't forget, they get put up in an hotel, free gratis, all food, meals allowance and petrol and all that, don't they? It's a morning, it's a couple of days away, isn't it? Saturday night in an hotel at Bradford. You know what hotel they take you to in Bradford, don't you? And then Sunday morning, they used to have a big breakfast. When I went there for my second, they were all having a big breakfast. All of them. I says, look at them over there, shithousers. You know what I mean? But, look, thanks for speaking about this. I know it's a brave thing you've done, because, look, I don't get on with them at all. And they avoid me at shows like the play. They go, oh, God, he's here. You might get a bit of shit over this, but if you do, I'll point you in the direction of a solicitor who's more than welcome to take these on for free, mate. She can't stand them. She's called Celia. She'll take them on, and they'll not want to bother with you, mate. Trust me. Look, they've done wrong. Maybe we should take legal action against them. I don't know, but they're that pompous that they don't care, do they? They don't care what the fans think. They don't care what hardcore fans think, or even license holders. All they care about is getting that money in. That's why some of the fights that they're signing off on are that bad that they just want to get the money in. Some of these fights that are being made now wouldn't have been made 5 years ago, you know, or 3 years ago. It's that bad, but they're in a desperado situation. That's why I'm calling for change. We need a new governing body to move us forward. Or these people, they need taking out of positions. They're hanging on for dear life for the free gratis. That's all it is. It's all boils down to money. Absolutely. Like I said, last year, it were getting up for £1 million that they spent. Never paid no tax in it. We're all put through as expenses. That's on Company House, public record. So how can such a small group of people do all that money in a year? It's pretty simple when you're traveling around the world and taking your partners and limousines and hotels and all the other stuff that was on. We know them hotels at Vegas, you can have all sorts done in them rooms, can't you? Massages, you can have a tailor-made suit, shoes, a lot. We all know what goes on. It's been going on for far too long now, and it needs to stop. That money could be put into grassroots boxing or stuff like that. They could give every gym in the country a pair of gloves, one pair, but they're not going to do that. It's an old boys club and it needs busting up from inside out. It needs ripping up and starting again. If anybody's out there who's got a few quid and you love boxing and you're retired and you're honest, and we don't just mean like ex-chief of police like Les Potts or that John Reese, is he? John Reese, I know you're watching your shit house. Is he a QC or something? Well, they need him in-house, don't they, for all legal stuff. We're not talking about you lot that have joined the cult. We're talking honest people who care about fighters, who want them to have pensions and better healthcare and stuff like that. Stuff they've been talking about since the 70s. They were talking about this when Barry McGuigan, he beat a kid called Ali and he died, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah, young Ali. Yeah.
Young Ali, we call. They were talking about this then. When were that? Were that early 80s? Well, wasn't it?
980 or 81.
1980, 81. They were talking about it 40 odd years ago. And they're still paying the same lip service. Oh, Pokey, you'll never guess what? Steve Gray's going in front of board. So fucking what? That don't mean no, does it?
Well, they'll be on TV next week, won't they?
Terry O'Connor were in front of board for Richardson carry on, wasn't it? So what? Howard Foster, what? They've all been in front of me. They just go have a jolly up. That's all it is. Have a jolly up, high five. Wow, you doing a good show last night, wasn't it? You know, a bit of a bad stoppage, wasn't it, Ian John Lewis? Yeah, well, what we're going to do, I don't worry about it. Everybody forgot about it in a week, Ian. And that's that. Ian John Lewis, the man that could stop an Intercity 125 in seconds. But anyway, let's finish off on there. I don't want to go too much into what's happened at weekend because I'm going to cover it weekend on Wednesday afternoon. But Conor Benn fought a guy pushing 38-year-old, 10 years without a knockout, and that was a TKO. So the man can't punch, 30% KO ratio. Algeria, one fight against a nobody in 2 years. Eddie Hearn said he couldn't knock skin off a rice pudding 4 years ago because he was 6 years without a stoppage then. He's now 10 years without a stoppage. DAZN built him up as a roadman killer, didn't they? What do you think to it? Thought Ben did what he had to do, didn't he?
Yeah, so I prefer to put things into context, and I forget the belts, I forget the hype, and I forget all the kind of ballyhoo around it. How I view Conor Benn is a young, maybe prospect is not quite right word now. I see him as a young fighter who's, in realistic terms, is probably the lower top 20 in the world.
Yeah,
he's playing his trade. He's definitely improving. There's very, very little doubt about that. I thought the setup was superb. You could see they'd rehearsed that so many times. The slam jab, get the reaction, get the distraction, then the touch jab straight through the middle. I loved watching the combination. I thought, in terms of his performance and watching him, you could see improvements. Very little doubt about that. And you have to put this where it is. I would probably have him about number 3 or number 4 in Britain right now. And as I've said, about the lower top 20 in the world. So that's where Conor Benn is. Credit to Conor Benn, good performance. against an international opponent, what would have been 30, 40 years ago, as seen as just that. Unfortunately now, the word former world champion is bandied around so many times, and it just means that you've been a belt holder and you've probably picked off one of the weaker champions, and they use the word former world champion. Now, ultimately, I was speaking to a friend of mine, Stuart, a couple of weeks ago, and I said, we chat about boxing every day, and I said to Stuart, I think Conor Benn probably wins 5-6 rounds. I can see him getting Algeria out of there, but Algeria basically becomes civilized. You could see him semi-retired from boxing on the sofa.
That's own employee, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
yeah,
own employee.
Yeah, so he's a colour commentator, pundit for the Zone. You get offered a fight, a few quid, it keeps your profile out there, and he stepped up. I don't care what condition you're on the scales. You might look like you're in superb condition, but ultimately you're civilized, you're not in the gym. Ben's had 4 fights this year, he's active, he's sharp, he's fired up. And there was only one way that fight was going to go. Again, the guy was 37 years old. He'd had 1 fight, as you've said, in 2 years. It was a good performance for a guy who's developing and who's definitely looking a hell of a lot better than he was 2 or 3 years ago. Where I struggle then is when we start to talk, I even mentioned the word Crawford and Spence. That's where I struggle. You're not ready, or anywhere near ready for them. And remember the last conversation we had, Russell, we were talking about this, and I was saying it's that name association. You mention a name, you link it to yours, it boosts your profile. All the clickbait on IFL now will be talking about Brook and Khan and this and Broner and Spence and Crawford, and it gets views, doesn't it? It gets your name out there. But ultimately, he's not ready for them in a million years. He's not going to fight Victor Ortiz or anything like that. And it just becomes something that's saleable and marketable. You know, if he was called Connor Smith, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? Let's be honest. We'd be just saying, oh, he's not a bad kid. Let's keep an eye on him. He looks one for the future. And we'd be just talking like that. But because he's called Conor Benn, it is what it is. What I will also say is, whilst I like watching him inside the ring, and I loved watching his dad, you know, that was kind of my era. He wasn't my favourite of the middleweights. I was more Bomber Graham and Watson, but I loved watching his dad. I remember the great nights his dad gave us. But what always frustrates me is Conor Benn, I start to warm to him and I see a great performance. And then after, in the post-fight interview, he opens his mouth and it's just like, you're so obnoxious and so rude and so disrespectful and so above yourself and above your station. You just turn me off. And I think a lot of people I speak to said the same thing, says, it just turns you off. He speaks, he needs some PR training or some media training or something, or they need to give him 10 minutes before his adrenaline's dropped, something, because, you know, his actions, you know, we all remember the situation with the watch, you know, showing off 250 grand watches during a pandemic when people have lost their livelihood and their lives. And then we see this behavior afterwards where he's just calling people out. And for me, the most disappointing thing was, you talk about the big names and you say, I'll knock anybody out. And then you mention Adrian Broner's name. So you've got Adrian Broner, who's probably weighing about 12 stone right now. He's had 1 win in 4 years. He's got trouble with the law, trouble in his kind of personal life. He's nowhere near a gym. And then you start to call out someone like Broner. So your actions and your words say one thing, and then afterwards you talk about a Broner, and I'm like, do us a favour, mate. Just do us a favour. Just drop back down. You know, belittle yourself and fight McKinson, fight Congo, fight, you know, even Florian Marcoux.
Jenkins.
Just step down, because we know you're a level or two above these guys. So take these fights, Conor, as learning fights, and you know, do a little bit of cleanup. Maybe you should have one of those things outright we've been talking about at the beginning of the show, which is something you'll be able to look back on with pride, instead of these plastic trinkets that they hand out now, these Intercontinental, Diamond, Youth, Interim, ABC, bollocks. Maybe you could have had a Lonsdale belt outright. That might have been a beautiful thing for you. I'm sure you regret that later on in your career, or maybe it's beneath you. I don't know.
His dad regrets it, doesn't he? But his dad won't go near Bomber Graham, would he?
No, he wouldn't touch him.
Who was that guy from Leeds who didn't fancy it as well? Was it Frank Grant?
Yeah, with Frank Grant was a good fighter. We've got some good fighters, haven't we? We've got like the Johnny Melfers and the Rod Douglases. We've got a real good crop of domestic fighters, or slightly higher than that. I mean, we saw what happened with Michael Watson against Ben, didn't we? When he did go near one of our dangerous domestic fighters, and that's not denigrating Nigel Benn. He beat the Barclays and the Dewitts and the McClellans. Ben had some good wins, but it's about being steered at the right time. But it's when you're trying to. One of my favourite sayings is, you can kid some of the people some of the time, but you can't kid all of the people all of the time. And I think that's what they're doing right now with Ben. You and I know, if you put him in with Crawford, he probably wouldn't make a sparring partner for Crawford. And that's not being rude to Conor Benn, by the way. It just means you're not ready. Your tools aren't there. And I don't even think you could handle Crawford in sparring. Spence, I dread to think what he would do.
He put him into orbit, wouldn't he, Spence?
Yeah, honestly. And you've got, so when he said, was it Eddie Hearn said in 2022, there'll be a world title for Conor Benn. And I just smiled and I thought, I bet you're actually right. And I said this on your show previously, Russell. I thought, yeah, I bet you're right, Eddie. It won't be a genuine world title. It'll be a fucking whatever. You'll do a Charles Martin job, won't you? You'll wait for someone to get stripped or some regular belt or whatever nonsense belt. And then
upgrade.
Yeah, and then you'd be like, it's a little bit like the belt that Tank Davis won. He says he's a light welterweight champion. I thought it was a guy called Josh Taylor who was the undisputed light welterweight champion. And you'll end up with a situation. But the thing is, the casuals with Conor Benn and the fans will be saying, he's a world champion now. And it's a situation, sadly, we've got ourselves in for. But back to the performance. Good performance. Definitely improving. Just have a little bit of humility, Conor. After you've boxed, and have a little bit of modesty. It goes a long way with a lot of people.
Does Conor Benn beat David Evanesian next?
I would say no. I think Evanesian's at this stage, he's too much of a man for him. He's too hardened, and it would turn out into a shootout. And I think Evanesian would wear him down. He's one of those who needs him, isn't he, Evanesian?
Yeah. Well, Tony Bellew came out and he said that Evanesian loses against Conor Benn. The only two he won't put him near, Spence and Crawford. And then Andy Lee turned to him and said, what about Ugas and Enos? And Bellew come shriveled up like a prune in front of him after Andy Lee said that. So go on, Andy Lee. But Tony Bellew was going to come out to go in to bat for a matchroom fighter, isn't he? So, we've got Dan Barker.
Tony Bellew, and I've met Tony a couple of times. He used to be on England squad with Sykes, and I've had a few exchanges with him on Twitter a long time ago before I came off social media. And I will say, and I always speak the truth. I kind of like Bellew, and I liked him as a fighter and sometimes as a pundit. But when you're working for someone like DAZN, I saw a feature with Bellew before the Joshua and Usyk fight. And Bellew said technically that Anthony Joshua was the best fighter since the prime Mike Tyson. And I remember just thinking, it's probably the most ridiculous statement I've heard in my life. And then he went on to explain it. And I thought, this is the hype train when DAZN was kind of, really launching into the mainstream. Anthony Joshua is technically the best fighter since prime Mike Tyson. And I was thinking of Lennox Lewis and Holyfield and I was thinking of all these fighters, and I thought, it's statements like these what make you look like you're not neutral. Your job is to be neutral. Your job is to sell a fight. Your job is to promote fighters, not a fighter on the left-hand side of the bill. Your job is to be neutral. Your job is to inform. You're an expert. You're a former world champion. Your job is to educate the viewer and to give a sound, balanced, reasonable argument and be neutral. That's my opinion. That's your job. And when you're saying things like that about Anthony Joshua, I don't believe Tony Bellew doesn't know boxing history. I don't believe Tony Bellew doesn't know boxing. I know he does. I know he does. So why are you saying comments like that?
Because they want to get paid and they want to stay in the loop, don't they? Because they've got, well, what else is he going to do?
I wonder if he still holds that opinion that he's the best technical fighter since a prime Mike Tyson after the Usyk fight.
Well, no, because all you get then is silence, don't you? It's like Johnny Nelson said that Usyk's not as good as Tony Bellew technically. Bellew was better than him technically. And you just saw what Usyk did to Bellew, didn't you?
Well, Johnny Nelson also said that Tennyson would beat Tank Davis, didn't he? So,
and he said Tackham's like Holyfield and Michael Moore or Holyfield and George Foreman rolled into one, and that he fears for Joshua in this fight.
To be fair, I think he was spot on there, but I think what he meant was Holyfield and Foreman now.
Yeah. Because well, they'd probably still beat Tackham now, wouldn't they?
Big George would probably turn him over, wouldn't he? And
Big George, they've probably got the same haircut with shaved head.
Yeah, Carlos Tackham, that household name, eh?
Yeah, 12 days notice to fight Joshua.
And he still give him a fight, didn't he?
And Joshua and Johnny Nelson's got a squeaky bum over it because he's worried, fears for Joshua. But okie dokie, listen, thanks for coming on, Julian. You've been a real tonic to the Porky Express train.
Thank you.
This will be a couple of days. We'll get it an introduction to it and an end. And if you could send me them couple of pictures again to me WhatsApp, with you and Gary.
Absolutely.
And I'll get them put into this video. All right.
And thank you for listening. Thank you for all the really great comments. Thanks for giving me this platform to get something off my chest. Again, what Stuart would say, cleaning out my closet. And honestly, all you license holders, you need to be talking about Gary Sykes and getting that belt. You really need to be talking about this. You need to do the right thing. And also, just one more thing, Russell. Spoke to Gary. Gary's thrilled that we're doing this. You know, he's not in the best of places at the moment, but I know you're planning on coming over. We'll do a little bit of filming. Yeah. Sykes said he'd love to meet you and he'd love to have a cuppa and have an interview.
At end of month, at the very end of the month, when I do, and I'm over that way, to do helmets of the year. We do helmets of the year. So get your votes in, porkycorner@mail.com. And what I do, I hire a studio for an hour. But what I'll do, the guy who does the filming, we can do helmets in 40 minutes. It'll probably be a 2-hour thing. We'll come over and we'll throw a few quid at doing some filming with Gary, and we'll get jazzed up. Do a little bit. How are you doing now? What are they doing now? These boxers or ex-boxers, and it might turn into something else. I might start doing other things like that every month or every couple of months. But because these people like Gary Sykes, they should never be forgotten, in my opinion. But too many of them are. Your Michael Gomez's, your Gary Sykes's, you know, your Carl Thompsons and that. Do you know what I mean? People are probably nicking my ideas now, but so what? And that, it doesn't really matter to me. The more people that interview ex-boxers, the better, as far as I'm concerned. These are guys that spilt the guts in the ring. Nobody gives them a second thought now. And I always think about them people, you know, the guys who got beaten. What are they doing now with their lives? Do they work in a factory? Are they involved in boxing? What are they doing? They're not all hula hooping like former fighters around here. They're like forgotten. And are they in Nick? Are they on streets? Like, what are they doing? I always bothers me. I always want to know if they're all right and stuff like that. And I'll always bang on about pensions and safety for boxers, because nobody gives a shit about boxers. I've seen it close up. Seen it close up, no. And I just think that boxers sometimes just need an arm around them. They need somebody to go into bat for them, and not everybody's got big promoters behind them. That's just how I look at it.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a travesty what happens with some of these fighters. And as we've said, listen, we're honest and we keep it real on here. You keep it real. Not every fighter's an angel, and
no.
You know, people always say, you know, every boxer deserves respect, you know, for stepping in the ring. And what I always say is, well, the act of stepping in the ring deserves respect, but some boxers are tossers, you know. But genuinely, I find most boxers I come across, they're the bravest of men. They're really, truly like unique people, and they deserve just that respect because they are they give us the entertainment. It's a brutal sport. You know,
Oh.
we have to question ourselves really when we get excited by watching this sport. You know, and it's not the most politically correct of sports, but the thing what you can do, you can at least make sure it's run efficiently and it's run smoothly and it's run fairly. So people like us, you know, people all like all the viewers and everybody else can enjoy the sport. So credit to all the ex-boxers and credit to all the boxers out there now. And just a reminder to all the big promoters and all the people making a livelihood out of this. Just remember this when you're at these shows and you get these imports coming over, and they're just, you can see them turn up. It always makes me sad on these matchroom shows when they get the house fighter with all the sponsorship and all the big entourage, and you get these imports coming over and you can see them in like quite scruffy looking tracksuits and just people we know struggling. When you get these guys on your shows, just remember the professional fighters are the bravest of the brave. Look after them, treat them with respect, and treat them fairly.
Yeah, that's it. Right then, well, listen, you have a great day, Julian, and I will speak to you soon.
You take care, Russell.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Okay,
mate.
Bye. Well, that was Julian McGowan. I thought he spoke quite elegantly there. A bit more elegantly than me. So Robert Smith, you fucking shit house. Get this sorted, Gary, for Gary Sykes. Otherwise, I'll not leave you alone on here. You'll always be in my thoughts, Robert Smith, till you sort this. Because if it were for Warren or Hearn, you sort it for their fighters. So why can't you sort it for Gary Sykes? Hey, or is that because he's one of the little people, Robert? Hey, is that because he's one of the little people? Well, I don't really give a shit about border control on here. But do the right thing, Robert Smith. Don't be a shithouse all your life. All right? Be nice to the people on your way up. So on the way down, they won't be as nice to you, Robert Smith. I'm not saying that boxing fans should throw a drink on you, Robert Smith, when they see you at shows. No, I'm not saying that. If I see you at a show, I will. And you'll know it's come from me. But what are you going to do? You fuck all as usual. And on that note,